All right, I'm going to turn it over to you, Amanda and Tracey.
Fantastic. Thanks for having us today. I'm Amanda Joyce. I have got my work bestie, Tracey Garcia McHugh, here with me. I'll let her introduce herself, but I'll jump in first. I am an associate professor of psychology, so I'm coming at things from the angle of working with students directly in the classroom, but also in mentoring experiences through advising and doing research with students and that sort of thing. And in working with students, I have found myself pretty frustrated with some of the difficulties that many of the students face in trying to get accommodations for their different abilities, and have been wanting to brainstorm how we can fix this, how we can make things better for our students and better serve these students. And I'm hoping that we can have a productive conversation today about that.
So, hi, I'm Tracey. I also am a professor. I'm assistant professor, not associate, assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at Murray State. I too come from working with students in the class, out of the class, but I also always think of very intervention kind of ideas, or like, what can we do? I also want to brainstorm, but my research area has been in intervention with adolescents and adults, primarily in risk behavior, but just in general too. And so I'm always interested in how we can actually work to change some of these issues we all come across, and I'm looking forward to some of your ideas as well.
Fantastic. So you'll find a QR code and a bit.ly link at the top right of your slide here. I put those here in case it would be helpful for you to follow along in a different location, and also so that you can have access to these slides after the presentation today, because it is my hope that we won't be talking a whole lot, Tracey and I, that we're going to be able to really dig into some resources and some discussion together, and that you can take a lot of pieces of this and see how it can be helpful to you in the future. My goodness, all the windows open. Let me advance this slide. There we go. So today I am hopeful that we can just kind of have some conversations to talk about some of the barriers to learning that our students face within that virtual learning environment. The conversation is naturally going to also include the physical classroom as well, but kind of exploring some of those barriers that are unique to the virtual classroom and how we can overcome those barriers. And again, I hope that we can spend the majority of our time today in discussion, talking about what has worked for you and what are ways in which we can take these pieces that are working and share them to the benefit of students. So we'll talk a little bit about the background on accommodations within academia, and how some of those accommodations are working well in some ways and not so well in other ways, and how that line between working and not working is often drawn alongside a line of visible versus invisible disabilities. How, hey, maybe we're not doing such a great job dealing with those invisible disabilities. We'll also talk about kind of this line between physical and virtual spaces, and how maybe we're not doing so great in the virtual spaces in comparison to the physical spaces. But again, I hope that we can spend the majority of our time in conversation and discussion today. So Tracey, I'll let you kick it off here.
Yep. Okay, so if we look at just a general overview of individuals with disabilities, it is one of the larger growing minoritized groups that we have in the US. It seems to be hovering between 19 to 26% of the population, depending on the data source. It varies because, of course, data source is like who you can get, who will disclose. So you see quite a bit of variation. But if you look and contrast that with other groups, you see that it's, again, one of our larger groups in the US. And while it is individuals with disabilities are often sometimes referenced, we often do not hear enough about them or how we can accommodate them, especially in academia. Now, part of the reason why I said it also hovers depending on if you can get people to disclose is part of it is disclosure. And especially in academia, disclosure isn't always done, as individuals may feel unsafe or uncomfortable to disclose that they have a disability. And especially among those with intersecting identities. So if you already identify as someone with a marginalized or minoritized group, and you also have a disability, you might even feel even more uncomfortable to be somehow as perceived as even more different or outside of the kind of dominant groups and structures. But at any time, anyone can have a disability, and any one of us could or do have a disability, and we just don't always know it, and we don't always disclose it. So if you look at individuals in academia, our students, many of our students actually, of the ones who disclosed, do have some kind of disability in some way. So 18% of full-time or 21% of part-time undergraduates and 12% of graduate students, both full-time and part-time, identify as having a disability. And the majority of them tend to kind of lean on specific learning disabilities and ADHD, but there are many more disabilities, as you can see. And we also know that they're higher among veterans, women, individuals who are unmarried, and certain ethnic or racial groups. So again, it is a part of our systems that we don't always acknowledge. Okay. But again, even though we have a large, a decent amount of people with this endorsement, we don't adequately really serve individuals with disabilities. Recent estimates indicate that only 30% of individuals with disability actually inform their colleges about their disability. And we also know that individuals that attend four-year colleges are more likely to receive accommodation than individuals who attend two-year colleges. And then it even becomes more complex because if you look, we're losing quite a bit of people from high school to college. So 97% of high schoolers who receive accommodation for learning disabilities, when you compare it to the 17%. So we're having a pretty decent loss between high school and college. And I seriously doubt it's the disability like changing. It's more likely that the barriers in disclosing and receiving accommodations are creating this loss that we're seeing. Further, those with mental health diagnoses or disabilities are typically the ones that are also not pursuing accommodations. So the ones that are less visible to other people are often incredibly underserved in academia. Okay. Okay. So individuals with disabilities are also significantly less likely than when compared to their non-disabled counterparts to graduate from college, even if they receive accommodations. They're also less likely to enroll in a four-year college or university, and they're less likely in general to participate in post-secondary education. So we know that individuals with disabilities are less likely to go on to college to graduate, especially in 4 years. And then these are even the individuals with accommodations. So the ones without accommodations are even less likely to graduate and to complete their colleges. A lot of times students with disabilities are often compared to kind of like a hypothetical average student, especially in the political arena or in popular media, or even when people are talking about students. It's kind of this idea that there is, you know, the average college student, and we base how accommodations are or how everyone should perform based on this very strange amalgamation of an idea. But really, the average college student doesn't truthfully exist if we think about it. And I'm sure many of you who have worked with students We know that many of our students have different lived experiences, they have different lived lives. And so this idea of an average college student just really doesn't help anyone, including the students who need accommodations. Okay. Your turn.
So added on to all of that, we also have this problem that not everybody who would benefit from an accommodation is going after these accommodations. So I saw in the chat, it's surprising that 94% of high schoolers receiving accommodations, but only 37% with disabilities are informing their college. There is this huge drop off in who is reaching out and getting these disabilities, and it can be difficult to try to combat some of the barriers that they're facing. One of the barriers that is the easiest to try to remove is that oftentimes students get to college and they're not aware of the resources that are available to them. So getting that information out early and often to students can be really beneficial to make sure that they're taking advantage of the resources that are out there. And offering welcoming reminders and welcoming language within your syllabi to get this information out there repeatedly can be helpful. But even when students have the information, they're often concerned about the stigma in outing themselves. And they don't just have to out themselves and their disability once. They need to reach out to disability services, and then disability services is in contact maybe with a housing office, maybe with individual faculty members. When faculty members aren't working with them appropriately, this might mean going up to deans or provosts or more. And they may have to remind faculty members several times, hey, you said you would do this. And hey, this thing that happened in class today is also a difficulty here. So they're having to go about this repeatedly, even if everything works well and they don't have to do this. They report finding the process of getting accommodations to be burdensome. So I was talking with a student last week who told me that in the process of trying to get accommodations for her disability, she was getting really frustrated because she needed to work with our student disability services multiple times per semester and then repeat the process every semester. So this particular student told me that she received testing accommodations, and that every semester she had to provide documentation for the disability that qualified her for these testing accommodations, and that throughout the semester she had to work with this office for every single exam to schedule things, oftentimes giving the same information over and over and over and over. And when that happens, when the process isn't streamlined in the best ways possible, then students can feel completely overwhelmed in the process, particularly when they're already being moved in so many other directions by the many other stressors of college life in general, but also the stressors of the disabilities. This has been particularly true during the challenges of COVID, thinking of immunocompromised students here and all that they've had to go through. I see a question or a comment in the chat I haven't had a chance to read yet. So let's see, they don't have much choice in high school given the federal IEP laws, which end at high school and college. Perhaps for the first time in their lives, students have some control over their academic experience and finally may feel they get to fit in without the special ed label. Yes, very good point. A lot of social pressures coming into play here. Added on to the many barriers that we've talked about, we've also got this problem that accommodations can differ between different campuses. So we're psychologists. I pulled a quote from APA's Take on Things, the American Psychological Association, but it's standard language from the Americans with Disabilities Act that says that these accommodations happen but only when they are not causing undue burden on the university. There is a lot of variability in what's considered an undue burden. So some universities have many resources in place that make it very easy to bring in certain accommodations, and other universities don't have the same resources, cannot provide the same accommodations without a lot of extra effort, a lot of extra purchases, a lot of extra strain. And so what you'll find is that many students who could benefit from an accommodation will get rejected because the resources aren't there. In addition to this, Tracey's found a wonderful quote from Justice. Tracey's found a wonderful quote from the Department of Justice that talks about the need in requesting an accommodation to show, for the student to show that their condition substantially limits their ability to perform a major life activity compared to most people. This compared to most people piece of the puzzle also opens up the door for a lot of biases. So there is an administrator or a staff member who is reviewing all of these requests for accommodations, and they're bringing their own biases into the picture. If they believe that this comparison is not working out, then they may unduly remove that accommodation from that student.
And so it gets even more complex when you look at how there's also disproportionate access to accommodations. While students with disabilities may face a variety of challenges, individuals with intersecting identities may be more at a disadvantage. So if you look at literature, a lot of times what they talk about is kind of the capital you need to navigate these spaces. So there's social and cultural capital, and then there's the economic capital. And so social and cultural capital provides students with the kinds of knowledge and support needed to pursue accommodations. So students often need to know where to go, the process, and have the ability to articulate the need for accommodations. When we talk about biases in some of the decision making, it's problematic as oftentimes students, when they're disclosing, they have to articulate what they need and the problems they've had. And if they've had to do this before, or they don't quite have the language to do so, this can actually create biases on the evaluator side, where if someone is stumbling or presenting less kind of coherent, they might think that this is not necessarily something they should accommodate or needed as well, because the individual may not have the language or the ability to articulate in a way that aligns with the evaluator's view, right? Some research demonstrates that individuals who work in the disability services offices often are like between 75 and 85% European American, and most of them, like over 90%, indicate that they're highly educated. So they all have, there's already like worldviews being brought in. Often students who are first gen or occupy other marginalized identities may not have the resources that students with privileged backgrounds do. For example, students with high social capital may have primary caregivers that can help them navigate these systems and these spaces, and they may be more familiar with them compared to students who do not have models or do not have like social support. Maybe individuals have friends, they're like, yes, you should do this, right? And they're getting reinforced for this behavior. If you contrast that experience as individuals who don't have the models or don't have provided reinforcement, it gets even more difficult to request accommodations. And social and cultural capital goes beyond even that. It's more subtle sometimes. Those who have more social and or cultural capital may feel that they may feel more at ease in these academic environments and the people in them. So if you have grown up around people that were in academia, or you were part of academia, or your primary caregivers were, you might be used to interacting with these individuals or in these spaces. And so they might feel more okay with disclosing their disability status and seeking accommodations. individuals who already feel uncomfortable in these spaces or environment may not want to appear more different than this kind of average college student by outing themselves. If you're already feeling uncomfortable, you don't want to feel more. You don't want to feel even more different. Now, economic capital is the resources you need, right? The financial resources. And this could be very obvious in like barriers for paying for testing if it's required, because some places require testing. It's not always required, but it could be. Or it could be even more subtle than sometimes we think about. So for example, even if the university say you need to test, but the university offers free testing, this requires transportation and time. And individuals may not have that if they have economic hardship, especially if some of our students are already dealing with things like food insecurity or housing issues. Finding time and transportation are additional barriers they might not be able to overcome. When you look at the research, what's really interesting is that while a lot of the loosening of kind of the way that we look at accommodations or validate accommodations, or, you know, students tell there's accommodation and we look at it, it originally was done from a very social justice perspective. And what they found was that, unfortunately, it was kind of a curvilinear relationship. So if you look at learning disability classifications, accommodation and family income, what you find is that this relationship is curvilinear, where students are more likely to be classified as having a learning disability if they're coming from low-income families, but also high-income families too. And those who are kind of the middle-income families were not as often classified. And while this may happen, what's more alarming though, what's also alarming is that students from the more wealthier families were more likely to receive accommodations when you compare those individuals to people who have middle or lower incomes. And so we're seeing that there is disproportionate access to this. And if you look, there's some other work that looked at just the institution-wide access. And it turns out that colleges, like the top 8 colleges, Ivy League colleges, the top 8 small liberal art colleges, they were substantially more likely for their students to have accommodation compared to two-year colleges or colleges that have lower like SAT scores or lower or they're more cost-efficient schools. Those schools were much less likely to grow in giving accommodations. So you went from like 19 to 23% in two-year and low-cost schools, and there was like 237% increase in the Ivy Leagues and the small liberal arts schools. And so some of the most selective colleges are the ones that students are receiving more accommodations, but we know that individuals who identify with disability, that have a disability, they're more likely to go to two-year colleges or four-year colleges that are less restrictive in attending. And so these findings really highlight the disparity that exists in accommodation. Students with disabilities are more likely to go to these institutions, but they're less likely in those institutions to give accommodations. And so we have another problem even within accommodations. Okay, so in the chat, yes, on campus, what does that mean? Very true. There is a big question on what on campus means for them. And for example, in testing, a lot of the testing has to be often done in person. So even if they're more comfortable online, it's very difficult for them to access free testing online. A lot of the free testing kind of stuff is more likely to be in person. There is like, you know, the advent of online therapy and things like that, but those often cost as well. And for diagnosis and testing, it's often in person, at least for free. Okay, Amanda, your turn.
There's always the challenge of unmuting myself and getting to the next slide. Thank you all for being patient. So from here, I'd kind of like to go into some of the disproportionate ways in which we are applying accommodations to physical, outwardly apparent physical disabilities versus other disabilities, and some of the ways in which we're accommodating within the physical environment in comparison to these virtual environments. Because I agree, it's a huge question. What does on campus mean when you're dealing with students who are largely not going to the same physical space, and on campus to them may be their bedroom. So to the idea of outwardly apparent physical disabilities, this is blatantly a screen capture of an email that I received last week from our university that was grumping about, as they should have, was grumping about somebody who was removing tables from a classroom that we share, and it was in violation of some ADA standards. Okay, so this was blatant and terrible, and nobody should be going against these ADA standards. But it got me thinking about how I've never gotten an email about this. When you see violations of other sorts of standards for those with disabilities. So I've never seen emails going out to professors about this thing is getting in the way of these students who have sensory issues. This thing is a barrier in the way of students with learning disabilities. So it seems as though much of the conversation, at least on our campus, is centered around those outwardly apparent physical disabilities. This is how we're working with students in, let's say, in a wheelchair, even though the diversity in different disabilities is, of course, much more than that. Okay, and then more than that, so many of our disabilities center on the physical classroom environment. And so you see conversations about test taking accommodations that will sometimes allow for the idea that this is happening in a virtual environment, but much of the time it has to do with the idea that students are going to a physical testing center. And then much of the other accommodations that you see have to do with learning within the classroom itself. So bringing in sign language interpreters, note takers into the physical environment, tape recorders or assistive listening devices into that physical classroom. It's very, very rare for conversations to consider that, hey, there is a virtual environment. So we've got all of these problems. Now let's solve them all. Of course, we can't do that right now. But it seems as though a lot of the conversation, both in the research literature and in conversations that happen with individual students, seem to come back to the same conclusions. If we are going to help students out and to get them the accommodations that they need and to stop putting barriers in the way of their learning, we need to communicate. And in order to communicate, we need to know what the policies are on our particular campus so that we can get that information out to students. But we need to keep a conversation open with these students as well, knowing that sometimes situations change and sometimes students will have disabilities flare up at different points in the semester and need different things, and knowing that we may sometimes be offering an accommodation to a student that it turns out isn't working all that well, and how can we alter what we're doing to help them out. In addition to this communication, it seems as though much of the conversation also goes towards universal design principles. I've linked a couple of places here. I'm not going to show you these links just yet so that I'm not going back and forth between screens, but know that when you get access to these slides, they're there waiting for you. So you don't have to worry about copying down links really quickly as I move between screens. I'm not going to show this video because I'm cognizant of time, but this video from CAST on UDL and Universal Principles for Learning is incredibly helpful. And it does a really good job of describing the ways in which we can reduce barriers by providing helpful things to students before they even have to ask for them. And that this isn't necessarily something that you do in response to a student reaching out, or in response to knowing that you have a student with a certain disability, but rather with an understanding that all students can benefit from these universal principles. Kind of the classic example is providing captioning on any sort of videos that you provide on a course website. Captioning can help hearing impaired students, but it can also help English language learners. It can help students with some sensory processing difficulties. It can help students who are sharing a bed with a spouse who goes to bed at a different time than they do, to watch these videos late at night. It's something that can help everyone. Other principles that are incredibly helpful here are allowing for many choices along the way, choices in how you can learn. So here you can look at this PowerPoint, or you can read these notes in a Word document, or you can watch these video lectures, or you can read this book. Choices in the sorts of assignments that you submit. So here's a final project. It can be a paper, or a podcast, or a infographic, or allowing these options can be really, really helpful to students. After this, I've also linked 2 other videos on the topic that I believe can be helpful. Again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to play those right now. And then I've also linked in some resources from some universities that seem to have the right idea. University of Washington has some really good resources. University of Arkansas at Little Rock, University of Colorado at Boulder, all really good resources. And at this point, I'm going to pop up to the top here and start showing you some of these. Tracey, can you confirm that you're seeing a website now? Okay, thumbs up, good. So this is one of the links that I provided you right at the beginning of this about universal design for learning, recommendations for books, those same videos that I linked for you, super duper helpful. And notice that at the top, there are menus within menus within menus to send you in positive directions if you want to dig deeper into all of this. I find the syllabus rubric and other such, like, this is this is a pinpointed thing that you can do. Other such recommendations like that, really, really helpful. CAST is another link that I showed you earlier on in all of this. They are kind of the be all end all of this movement, and they've broken things down more in terms of recommendations. Different universities that I linked have specific recommendations for things that you can do using screen readers. How do you handle that? What is universal design? So on and so forth. But then as you move down, you see ways that you can incorporate inclusive language in your syllabus to open up conversations about things. And then here's what you can specifically do in your online course concept. Okay, so having consistent layouts so people know where to go, but not getting too fancy with those layouts, because once you start getting fancy, it can get in the way of screen readers. It can make things cluttered. If somebody is moving back and forth between a mobile device and a computer, it can lead to some programming difficulties there, that sort of thing. Structure in those headings, structure in the way that you are creating your learning materials, using descriptive wording for a hyperlink, so that you're not just saying, here, click this. It can be helpful, again, with those screen readers. Different sorts of documents that you can post, including text descriptions, not trying to convey too much information within images, because again, screen readers can struggle with that, so on and so forth. Using captions, lots of good stuff there. very similar from the Little Rock webpage. Very similar ideas here, but put in slightly different ways that you can dig through and you can see what's working for different universities. I'm a big fan of using what's working from others. So I'll turn it over to Tracey for a second.
Okay. So in addition to things Amanda talks about, we could also talk about how to also address or hopefully start to work on this disproportionate access idea. Students who are gaining accommodations automatically in high school may not be aware of the support that's available to them when they get to college, or they might lack experience navigating the college system to acquire accommodations. And part of the problem really seems to be surrounding, again, communication with these students and between not just students, but their families and the institution. Like there's a breakdown there. So one thing that's really important in most intervention when we're talking about disproportionate access is outreach. So really creating open communication lines from the very beginning. So we could use community-based participatory approaches to work on this outreach. So we might do things like normalize and encourage the use of accommodations by partnering with admissions or welcome week or like first year orientation or like their first year orientation classes, and really working with kind of from the beginning, talking about accommodations and normalizing them and showing the clear path of how to get these accommodations. Given that we have such disparity, and some of it has to do with access, some of it has to do with capital, all kinds of things, part of it also is educating our institutions more. And while I would love to say that, of course, everyone abides by these and everyone knows these things, really creating learning experiences, especially in terms of individuals' own biases they might not be aware of, is very important as well. So it's outreach, but also working inside the institution as well. Really, another idea I've seen is that if students are okay with it, hiring students with disabilities, if they're okay with it, to serve as ambassadors for the office can also help. Creating videos for online environments with captioning to explain the process, right? We could create a video and we could export it to the faculty that they could put in their courses. And having people really describe the experience and showing the process in an example format might be very helpful, especially with online intervention. Having interaction with the online material is important as well. But it's really also about decreasing barriers, right? Having websites for the accommodation office, for the disability services that are streamlined and easy to use. Sometimes if you've been in various institutions, you realize some institutions' websites are very clear and you know the path and what you need to do and how to get to it. And in some institutions, it's very vague and the websites, you know, like links might be dead or something. So making sure these websites are usable and accessible and able to be used on mobile phones or with internet access that might not be the best, right? Having interpreters for individuals whose families might not have English as their first language, or being able to find an interpreter is very important as well. Even if you have, I'm sure some of you are aware, like even if you translate something into a language, it's always important to back translate. So really having the interpreter really in the command of the language is very important because things don't always translate exactly well. But one thing that I think is very important that we're still missing overall is developing a better understanding of students with disabilities' lived experiences. In the literature, we have an idea, we do some work, but I think still really examining these lived experiences and learning from the students themselves are very important. There's rhetoric and often many point to kind of like this imaginary student, and the student doesn't really exist. It's just what people think about what a student with disabilities would be like, or an average, without actually understanding their lived experiences. So to better serve students with disabilities, we need to better understand them, including those that are often underserved. It's incredibly important. I mean, even in our own classes, we could do it. I remember during COVID, when we had to all switch online, like in spring break, I remember sending out just an anonymous survey asking students about kind of their experiences and like how transitioning to online would be for them and internet access and all kinds of things. And I was surprised by, I shouldn't have been, but I still was surprised by the large variability of issues that my students were facing with and without disabilities. Some became caretakers all of a sudden. Some, were transitioning to places that they didn't have consistent internet access. Some of them were very uncomfortable with online classes and they were going online. And then some of them were just facing life experiences that were going to be incredibly difficult, like food insecurity and housing and things like that. So even just understanding where our students are coming from and the barriers they face within our classes are incredibly important, especially online. It would be nice to say that it all works out well, but life happens, and we have to, as educators, also, at least in my opinion, accommodate. And then when we're online, it's even more important because sometimes our interactions are asynchronous. So we really need to make sure that we're communicating with our students. Okay.
Great points. I'm very cognizant of the time right now. It looks like we only have 9 more minutes left. So I have a link on your screen because I initially intended to move us over to conversation on a Jamboard, but I think because of time, it might make more sense to have this conversation in the chat here. So just kind of some questions for you guys about what's working, what's not working, what barriers there are. First, I'd just kind of like to open it up to everyone with a chance to brag. So what have you designed into your courses that you think has been really beneficial to students that you're proud of, that you want to share?
Oh, automatic captions. That's really great. It is very time consuming, but you're right. It is really important. But I'm glad you edited because you're right. Some of them are pretty funny errors, like very strange things. I don't realize how often I sound apparently like, I don't know, like the words they pick up from me. I'm like, that is not what I said. That's really great. Yes, automatic captions.
If you're typing something right now, keep on typing and we'll visit it. But let's move forward just a little bit because I suspect, trying to incorporate different modes of learning, like text and caption video. Yes, allowing for the choices, allowing for these different ways of learning. Fantastic. What are your favorite ways to do that? We use Blackboard Ally with our LMS. It gives instructors scores for their document and suggests
That's really neat.
suggestions to fix them. It also gives students alternate formats such as pub and MP3. Very cool.
That's very cool.
Recording lectures so students can go back if they need to. Yes.
I agree.
I've had students tell me in the past that they'll listen to lectures while they're driving. They have long commutes and they can just keep hearing it
Yep.
over and over. So let's go to the other side of things. We've all made mistakes in the past. What did you used to do? And then you figured out, oops, that's not quite as inclusive as I thought it would be. And how have you improved on that? I'll share as people type. I have been very guilty in the past of getting really excited about a new technological tool and wanting to bring it into everything and then finding out that, oh, no, this is not working at all, because it's not interacting with these assistive technologies in the way that it should.
Yeah, I've done similar. I like to make things really jazzy on Canvas, and then I realized, oh wait, the tool can't read it. So I've had to like kind of step back from like the exact, or I eventually learned to use alternative text as well. There's often an option to write what it is instead. So I'll do that too. Because I like to make things like, you know, colorful in my Canvas page.
I'm saying
Yes.
my videos need to be chopped up into shorter pieces. Yes, it's so easy to get long-winded.
Very much so.
Learning about headers in documents instead of simply bolding text. Yes.
It's very important.
There's lots of information to pick up and it can be difficult to grab it all at once, right? Small incremental changes, improving a little bit every semester can be really beneficial to students. What complaints are you hearing from students? What are you hearing from students that they need? And how much luck have you had in signal boosting these complaints? Has it worked? Have you been able to get things for students?
So I can say a complaint I actually often hear across semesters is that some professors are not as accommodating, and don't want to give accommodations, or like they'll do the bare minimum. In terms of signal boosting, I can be honest and say that it's very hard to work around that. But I've heard that consistently, that it's not working for them. Or the other thing I hear a lot is I don't want to tell people that I need accommodations. In that case, I try to talk to student a lot and work on it, but I also understand that for some students, it feels very unsafe to talk about their disability. So those are two things I often hear, actually.
It can be challenging too, with all of the power dynamics at play. So students can often feel as though they don't have a voice, but so can junior faculty. What barriers are you facing? What do you wish you had that you don't have? What's in the way? I'll throw in that I wish we had more support in terms of time to get some things done, like the comment about the automatic captioning. Yeah, I wish I could just use the automatic portion, but you're right, you have to go back in and edit because weird things end up in there and you want to make sure that it's all accurate, but that takes time. I wish we had somebody who could do that on our behalf so that we could focus on these other things that need to be done. I am realizing the time now. So I just wanted to thank you guys for being here. Little understanding for mental disabilities or neurodivergent persons. Oh my goodness, yes.
Very much so. Very, very much so.
I hate to end on a sad note, but thank you all for being here